Numbers chapter 16. Up into Deuteronomy, so I came through this Numbers are pretty quick read. Most people don't like it because of all the lengthy, all the 12 tribes and the sacrifices that they had to bring and the numbering of the people. That's why it's called Numbers, and population and all that they did. But you hit and miss with this of some of these accounts, which again, you read this and you just say, oh, I know what's coming. And chapter 16 is not a good chapter, because you read it and you think, man, this is where God just about annihilated them all. I mean, I want to cover this twice in this same chapter that God says, Moses, step aside, and I'm going to consume them in a moment. Now, you look at the times that God did consume people in the Bible, which is horrifying enough, isn't it? Bible study, we're doing Genesis, and I've taken you all through that. But you have the two sons of Judah, and Onan, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he struck them dead right on the spot. And someone said that to me there just recently. They said, well, you know, the God of the Old Testament is not the same as the God of the New Testament. They're two separate gods, like. Or God had a change. No, it's the same God, because you go over to the book of Acts, and what happened to Ananias and Sapphira in the first church? God struck them dead right there on the spot. I mean, same. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, isn't it? You have, in the book of Exodus, you have Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, and they were offering strange fire at the altar, and God's fire come out of heaven and consumed them right on the spot. David, they was carrying the ark, and Uzzah thought he could help out, so he put his hand out there to steady it, and he dropped dead on the spot. I mean, you read these accounts where God in a moment, there was no discussion. There was none of this what I was talking about. Well, now, Lord, I think, Lord, can we communicate? There was none of that. God responded right then and there. Troubling, very troubling. So you read this, and this wasn't the only occasion of this, but it was enough that I want to give to you today. And I want you to see Moses' response, which has to be ours today because of what we're facing. It just has to be. This is how close. This is all my life that I've had. I have heard how close we are to the end. And again, every week produces for us another sign of the time, another fulfilling. They had, I don't know if it was last month or this month, I guess it was last month, and they said they showed the moon that was coming up over New York City, and it was blood red. So you know the prophecy in the scripture in the book of Joel where it says about the moon turning to blood. They had pictures of Australia where those typhoons were getting ready to hit, and the sky just gorgeous pictures, but troubling for all the signs of the times. I mean, again, disasters, calamities, shootings, all these things going on. And the one thing that is most needful is for someone to stand there in the gap and to say to the Lord, Lord, don't do this. Don't consume them. Stop at this. And again, you say, well, the old adage of this is that I read Ian Bounds wrote, I heard Ravenhill preach, and others have used it. They said it is one thing when God comes down and touches a man, but it is another thing when men reach up and touch God on behalf of someone else. I mean, to me, the most powerful ministry that there is the power of intercession. And the role of intercession is that you're not praying about yourself. There ain't none of this, Lord help me, Lord bless me, Lord take care of me, I. My three favorite people, me, myself, and I. I'm going to get that t-shirt made up. I think I can make a buck on that one. Because that is people's mentality. You ask them. You know, I don't ever remember being given a choice at the dinner table what I was allowed to eat and what I wasn't. You cleaned your plate, right? Y'all remember those days? Now today, If you said something in front, I don't like it. Didn't ask you. But there's options in this. We're going to get back to a time where there'll be no options. It'll just be surviving in that. That's the reason I say to see the pictures of Mozambique and what's going on there, so troubling about how close it is for us. And again, most people are completely oblivious, completely unaware of these kind of things that are in motion right now of this. And so to me, the greatest need of the hour is the role of an intercessor. And again, for that, pleading on behalf of someone else, not myself, or not me, myself, and I praying. And there are people, and again, people say, oh, well, I never ask for anything for myself. Well, that's not what the scripture says. Scripture, you are allowed to ask. Psalm 37 is a great promise that we are allowed to ask for the desires of our heart. Now, if you don't have any desires in your heart, well, yeah, I guess you're not praying for anything for yourself. But you ought to have some desire in your life is to say, Lord, I want to be holy, holy, holy. Lord, I want to be holy. Lord, I want to be pleasing to you. That's not a selfish prayer. That's a God-honoring prayer, but it is for yourself. But an intercessor is interceding on behalf of other people before God. And that role, responsibility that you and I carry, you look around and you say, well, who are we supposed to intercede for? Everybody that's not here. So aren't you tickled today that you get the responsibility of 21,000 other Hampshire Countyites that you get to intercede for? That on a day like this, is that again for Hampshire County, that there's 24,000? 21,000 are not in church, 3,000 are. The church has that responsibility. You can do the math in your family. 330 million people are in the United States today, and only 30 million were in church today. That means 300 million were not in church. 7.4 billion, if not 5 billion by now, because I haven't checked the population lately, but I imagine it's probably up 7.5, if not 7.6 billion people on the face of the planet. Only 1 billion are Christian. That means 6.5 billion we're responsible for, to pray and to intercede for. That's huge responsibility. Are your shoulders wide enough? Are your prayers, somebody, I don't know what to pray. I can't fill an hour of prayer. You can't pray for 6 billion people and fill an hour? Even if you went alphabetically. Well, there'd be some fun, wouldn't it? Trying to do alphabetically. Now let's do numerically. Let's do the ages, oldest to youngest. Regardless, let's do the geography. Let's do the continents, those, whatever. The responsibility of intercession is there. Why? Because something's not right. Trouble's in the air. Now, just as we looked at Jairus and the daughter in that same plea, this was a father coming to Christ for a daughter. One. One man, one Savior, one daughter. Life in jeopardy, right? This is a larger scale in Numbers 16. Now, starting in verse 1, now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan, and Abiram, the son of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, they took men, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in their congregation, men of renown, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And they said unto them, you take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore, then lift you up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. Now note Moses' response in verse 4. And so when Moses heard this, he fell upon his face. Now, this just shows us, and the only reason I read those first 4 verses is to show you that there's conflict. We're talking laughing, literally, joking. Can't we just all get along? And what's the reality of that? No. We wouldn't even know how to respond if that took place down in Washington, D.C., would we? Talk about utopia. Democrats hobnobbing with Republicans? What? President getting along with the House of Representatives and the Senate? What? We wouldn't know anything about that, would we? I really could throw in NCAA tournament jab. Duke and North Carolina getting along? What? Never mind. Things don't work that way. So here we are in the middle of the children of Israel. They've come up out of Egypt. God, in miraculous, powerful fashion. 10 mighty plagues. Life, death, right? Firstborn of all Egypt. Both men and animals die and are buried. Red Sea split. Walk across on dry land. Unthinkable. Waters closed back in on the Egyptians, their chariots, their horsemen. Drowned them. God takes care of their enemy. Miraculous fashion. Right? Powerful testimony. Look what the Lord has done in this. Now here they are. A couple chapters over. Chapter 14. Back a couple chapters there, they sent to go up into the promised land, look it out, come back, tell them where they're going to go, how they're going to divide the land up, and they come back with an evil report. They come back saying, oh, well, we'll never be able to defeat them giants. Man, we'll never be able to get into them cities. They got gates and bars on them. Man, we might as well go back into Egypt. They questioned God. They doubted God. And because of that evil report, the children of Israel rose up against Moses and Aaron and said, let's make a captain and let's go back into Egypt. And God shows up, and this is the first time that God said, Moses, let me consume these people. They're just too sinful, they're too hard-headed, they're too disobedient, and I'll make of you a mighty nation out of that. And this is one of the first occasions where Moses throws himself down on his face and says, God, don't do this. He intercedes, and God stops. Because if he hadn't stopped, and again, if we was in the flesh, I'm going to give them what they deserve. Okay, Lord, go ahead. You know, go get them, sick them, Lord. And not knowing that, again, God in a moment is going to consume them. Life, death, heaven, hell, eternity. This is, man, right now, this is going on. So now you got, when they disobey, that God says, from 20 years old and upward, all of you men that have been counted are going to die in this wilderness. You will never enter 1 foot inside the promised land. But your children that you said would be killed and used out here in the wilderness, I will let them inherit. And so you search the land for 40 days, and for every day a year you're going to spend in the wilderness. For 40 years, you'll be in this wilderness till you die. Well, sorrow upon sorrow. They don't get to go in the promised land, and they're not going to get to see it, but their children are, and that they've got to suffer in the wilderness with this. So all this conflict that they brought upon themselves, they add to it by throwing gas on the fire, that they raise themselves up and they come against Moses and Aaron. And so you see in these verses that they complain, that they threaten. Verse 11, they murmur, for which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord. What is Aaron that you murmur against him? Murmuring, not just you go to the doctor and he says you got a heart murmur. Chattering of the lips, murmur, complain. Never happy, never satisfied, you know. Always got something negative to say, something wrong to say. Well, I think if I was me, I'd do it this way. Well, if I was up to me, this is what I would do. Doesn't matter. God's already said what he wants done in this. And then you get down here to around verse 17, where Moses is saying every tribe's going to bring a censer and offer fire in it, and God will choose the one that he wants. So I'm going to read most of this now, so bear with me as we go down through this. Let's start in 16 where he deals with Korah. Verse 16, and Moses said unto Korah, be thou and all your company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron tomorrow, and take every man his censer, put incense in them, bring before the Lord every man his censer, 250 censers, thou also and Aaron each of you his censer. And so they took every man his censer, put fire in them, laid incense thereon, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And again, Korah, troublemaker, instigator, accuser. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And God speaks. This is horrifying, isn't it? And the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may talk to them, reason with them, have a task force with them. Do what? Consume. Now, had they not seen with the Egyptians? Had they not seen in other episodes how God consumes? This is horrifying, isn't it? Go like this. This means yes.
Yes, yes.
This is horrifying. What are you and I seeing today? In our lifetime, look what we're seeing in consumption. Lives, homes, minds consumed with evil, with drugs, with alcohol, disease, hopelessness. We have never seen it on this scale like what we're seeing today. And right in front of our very eyes, we've watched, over the last 5 years, we've watched what? An entire generation be consumed. We've talked about abortion, where an entire generation has been wiped out over the last 40-some years of Roe versus Wade. But as one old preacher said it, he said that's not the worst of the physical abortions that takes a life because the baby dies. A baby goes to heaven, right? God takes an innocent child into his kingdom in that because they haven't come to the age of accountability with that. He said the worst thing is for those that have been in the church that have heard the gospel and that they have been spiritually aborted because, again, they did not come full term. Oh, I'll think about it. You know, when the things get better, when I get better, or I do, then I'll start coming. Then I'll make my decision. Oh, I've got a life to live, and I've got things to take care of, and then I'll get. When I get older and I have time, then I'll come. They have been aborted spiritually, and they are as far away from the kingdom of God as an old heathen that sits over there in Indonesia somewhere that never heard the gospel. Spiritual abortion is just as damning as what we're talking about in the physical abortions with this. An entire generation consumed right in our lifetime. And most people, having seen it or know of it, are unmoved by it. But I'm not that way. When I read this scares me. I mean, the hair tingles on this because, again, I realize is that I'm seeing a mirror response from what God did to Israel here with Korah. I've seen a lot of Korahs in my life. I've seen a lot of people raised up. I've seen atheists. Madeline Murray O'Hara, who I never met, never knew. She was another generation. Your old generation. You know, but long before my time. You know, but she was a Korah. I don't want Bible read to my son in the public schools. She went against God, didn't she? Yep. All these things are against God. Anything against God is a Korah. It's just like a Jezebel. So if you get called Korah or Jezebel, that's not a compliment, okay? That's an insult. But these are people that are against God and the people of God. But I've seen Korah in the church, out of the church, politics, courts. I've seen it. They are a repeat. They take on a different name, a different face, but they're still the same thing. Anything to thwart God, to stop God. You can see it happen in the midst of all of this. And so Korah raised the people up, gathered all of them together, and God comes and speaks in verse 20. In 21, he issues that awful, awful threat. Separate, come out from among them, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. Now that's the second time that Moses fell on his face, isn't it? He fell upon his face. O God, the God of spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be wroth? And with all this, and thou be wroth with all the congregation? And they go through the midst of this, and you can read the rest of this in the midst of that, where the ground opens up and swallows Korah and Dathan and all their households, swallows it up. Horrifying, isn't it? But it's not so horrifying when you think today, because you see it in the headlines, sinkholes. You seen the sinkholes?
Yes.
You never heard about sinkholes before, did you?
Never.
And now?
All the time.
Common.
Yeah.
Whole ground swallows a whole car.
Yes.
Whole house.
Whole house. Yes.
Guess what? Number 16, it was happening long ago. And God caused the ground to clave asunder and to swallow them up for their disobedience. We had seen the destruction, like I said in opening, where God just struck them dead. Or fire fell from heaven. Sodom and Gomorrah, fire fell and consumed entire cities, abolished the entire area, region with that. Look at the floods. Look at the California wildfires. Rampage, consumed. Whole lives are lost, homes are lost, properties lost, crops are lost. This is horrifying. But then you go down after this, those people are dealt with and corrected. Verse 35, there came fire out from the Lord, consumed the 250 men that offered incense. There again, destruction, consumption. Then we go down into this, verse 42, 43. There's another trouble. Verse 41, they complained again. Very next day. People learn their lessons, right? Yes, sir. I learned from yesterday, fire come down and killed 250 people. You know, yesterday I saw where the ground clave asunder and Korah and all of his family were consumed. Yes, sir. I'm going to straighten myself up and do right. I've learned my lesson. And on the very next day, the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, and they looked towards the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, same message, get up from among them, this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. But you're not talking about one guy, one family. You're not talking about 250 men. How many people are you talking about?
600,000.
603,550 men, not counting women and children. Over 1 million people God was going to consume in a moment. How many people are in the United States? 330 million. How many people died last year with drugs, homicides, suicides, and drug overdose, and alcohol? 150,000. That's not even comparison, is it? To over 1 million to 150,000? A drop in the bucket, so to say. You want to do the math on that? Is that 10%? Something like that. 10%. A little over 10%, right?
What's that?
1%.
1% of what?
Of 1 million.
Yeah.
100,000 of 1 million is 10%.
1%. 10,000. 10,000.
Anyway, drop in the bucket. But this is what's at stake. And God says, step aside from them. I'm going to consume them all. Now, he says this twice. Back-to-back days. Man, this is not good. Life and death. And again, I don't know about you. If I'm heading home today in a car accident, heart attack, lightning bolt, I'm dead. I'm not worried about that. I'm not concerned about it. I'm not consumed with that. People think about life and death. People fear and worry and those kind of things. I'm not. But when I read this, it's not about me, myself, and I. It's what? It's about them. Going through stuff this past week. Had to find Rebecca's birth certificate. Lost it. Man, I'm telling you, papers, but I found all kinds of great memory stuff too. I mean, I'm like, oh, look what I found. Oh, and reminiscing and all good stuff like that. Found everybody's birth certificate, but Rebecca's. And so still looking. But going back and looking and all this memories of things that was and great pictures and all. Talk about memory lane, going through and all that. But I look at them, the pictures and the memories, and I think about what was, and then I think about what is, and I read this, and I think about what will be. You know, there is a time at the end of time, the judgment day, when God says, come out from among them. And you think about in 2 Thessalonians where Paul says, and the trumpet will sound, and the dead in Christ will rise, and then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to be forever with the Lord. That is the bringing of the saints, separating of the saints out. When you separate them out, who's left?
Sinners.
Nothing but the wicked. And you read where God says, and the wicked has the wrath of God abiding upon them. John 3:36, and the wrath of God abides upon them. Every lost person that you know today is not blessed. They are not, in favor with God. They have the wrath of God against them, where God says, pull the church out, and the only thing that remains is wrath. You and I hold this entire existence of society, of life in being. You don't think about that, may not understand all that. I don't understand all that. But if it was not for God's church, his beloved, his bride, remaining in this world today, there would be no reason for God to spare this world, our loved ones. He holds us here. Why can't I just go home? Why can't I get out of here? There is a reason why. If you remove Moses and Aaron from this equation here, pull them out, what would have happened to the rest of the nation?
Been destroyed.
You would have read about another Sodom and Gomorrah. Gone. Obliterated. And the only reason that God didn't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah earlier was because he was waiting for what? He was waiting for Lot to get out. Get out. I cannot destroy this place till you're out of here. And the only reason that he got mercy and sparing was more than likely was because of Abraham. Abraham interceded. 50, 45, 40, 30. There I am doing my auctioneer thing again, aren't I? 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Can I find 10 righteous there? Will you spare? If you can find 10 righteous, I will not destroy it. 10. But he couldn't find them. So Lot and his two daughters got out. Wife turned into Morton Pillar Salt Company. And wickedness was destroyed, consumed in a moment. And at the end of time, it'll be the same way. The church will be, as the term they like to use, raptured out. And all that remain, the heathen, the sinners, the wicked, the vile, religious. And he will consume them in a fervent heat, 2 Peter chapter 3, in a moment, engulfed. And they'll be escorted out of this life into the next life to stand immediately before the judgment throne, the great white judgment scene. And the books are open. The Lamb's Book of Life that has the saints' names in it. Is your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life? Remember that old song? Is my name written there? You better know. No, I'm in the white pages. Don't care. Oh, I'm in the yellow pages. I'm really uppity. I'm in the yellow pages. Don't care. The only place that I care is if my name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Now, there is another list, and old Ravenhill preaches on this. He said, wouldn't you like to be one of the top 10 wanted list of hell? Now, there you go. Hell is so, I read a guy that said that this past week and posted it on Facebook because I loved it. C.S. Lewis, I think it was, or Oswald Chambers, one of them, I can't remember now. He said, isn't it one of the most spectacular lives that you've lived for Christ? Is that when you die and to say, I am no longer in the battle, that hell rejoices. Such a soldier, such a fighter for our Lord, that hell can't wait till that faithful saint is removed. If Satan could have removed Moses and Aaron and God would have destroyed all of that tribe of Israel, the children of Abraham, Satan would have rejoiced in it. But he had two intercessors there. And what did they do? When God said, I'm going to consume them in a moment, he fell on their face. And they besought God, don't do this. You and I are left with the responsibility of intercession to pray, as I said earlier to you. Everybody that's not sitting beside you today, that's not with you today, that should have been here, could have been here, ought to have been here, but isn't here. You have an intercessory position and responsibility to pray for them. You know why? Because they will not pray for themselves. Most people that you run into this week never lifted up a cry to God, never thought about God, and are not thinking about God. And their only reference to God is when they normally take his name in vain. And the church today has that responsibility to do what? To understand God's wrath, anger, no God. I'm going to consume them in a moment. And he is consuming us. There is so much loss of life right now. It is spiraling out of control. You can't look at these disasters. You can't hear about these tragedies. It was, as I said, I didn't know the girl. We prayed so much about school shootings over the last decade, or however long we've been doing it. A long time we've been praying. So every school shooting was a wound to me. It was an attack to me because I felt like I failed. You know why? Because I had eyes to see, I had a mind to understand, and I knew that this was the work of the devil. To have some crazy person take a gun into a school and shoot it up and kill innocent people that didn't deserve it, right? All this year we haven't seen anything. God's been merciful. God's been gracious to us, and we praise his name for that. But that little place down there in Florida where that boy went in there and did that, now we're seeing the after effects, where these people are so troubled, so afflicted in their minds and their hearts. The church, literally, apparently absent to rescue them, to bring light into their darkness, to bring hope to their hopelessness, to bring peace to their anguish, and to say there is a reason why you were spared. To stop that girl from committing suicide. And not just her, but now the second one to follow. Anguish. Back to Jairus' daughter. That's somebody's daughter. Life and death. I'll consume them in a moment. And he is. Where are the Moses and the Aarons? And the church knows the responsibility, says, here am I, Lord. Send me. Here am I, Lord. Use me. A prayer movement, a prayer moment that causes us to fall on our face, prostrate, and to become so burdened about what's going on is to say, this is happening again. As it was in Numbers 16, so it's happening in the United States right now, 2019. Everything that we could do to provoke God, anger God, that God says, step aside. Now, some Christians are so arrogant, I do believe, mindset, they don't understand exactly, so they'll say, yeah, such hate, such violence that's out there, right? Hey, go ahead and give them what they deserve. You know, them liberals, them Muslims, give them what they deserve. Their souls are in jeopardy. Every one of those 50 that was killed over in New Zealand by that murderer last week, they died and they went to where? They went to hell because they didn't have Christ. Now that's horrible truths of people's thought process. Oh, well, they was innocent people in their place of worship, worshiping God. And we all worship the same God. No, we don't worship all the same God. There are many gods out there. Buddha is a god. Jehovah's Witnesses have another God. Mormons have another God. Catholics have another God. But there is one name under heaven whereby men must be saved, and that name is Buddha? Muhammad? Hare Krishna? Jesus. And there is no other name that men are saved except that name which is above all names, Jesus. We are not worshiping the same God, and their souls are in jeopardy. Tragedy is befalling. A Christian is killed, murdered, as they are 300 Christians killed in Nigeria because of their Christianity, their faith. They die and they immediately stand before God and they hear those words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You gave the utmost sacrifice. You gave your very life for the cause of Christ. But any other person that dies in these massacres and these tragedies that we're hearing, and they hear those words, depart from me, you worker of iniquity, I never knew you. Take them and bind them hand and feet and cast them in the outer darkness, where there's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, and they are consumed. Consumed, where the body never perishes, the worm never dies, the fire is never quenched. Consumed, Man, I've spent all winter throwing newspaper and kindling and wood into the fire to consume it so that it would produce heat. It's hard for me to understand fire that is never quenched. It's hard for me to understand the sorrows and the suffering that goes on in hell today, that they are never consumed, but they are in complete anguish. And all because they would not listen, they would not do, and they would not follow. And they were consumed in their sins. And the intercessors, the church, barely lifts up a squeak for such anguish of souls. But then you put a face to it. Now you got a name. That's my loved one. That's my neighbor. That's my family member. That's my friend. Sorrow. Lord, don't consume them. Hey, wanted to let you know. Went to the doctor this week, diagnosed me with cancer. Diagnosed me with a disease. I've got this long to live. And immediately your mind goes in, where are you at with the Lord? Are you ready? A child of God says, I'm ready. A lost person says, I don't know. How do I know? Man, time's clipping away now. There's urgency. There's this desperation we get back into. Man, help, truth, life. Speak it. Deliver it. That's your loved one. Have that conversation now before you get to that point. Hey, do you remember when we was talking about this? Hey, do you remember when I asked you? That's why I asked you for such a time as this. That your time is coming, because the time's coming for all of us. It is appointed unto men one time to die, and then the judgment. Are you ready? And you and I both know the answer. Wide and broad is the path that leads to destruction, and many there be that go in thereat. Straight and narrow is the way that leads to everlasting life. And how many is on that one? Few. Few. I'm going to consume them in a moment. Lord, give me time. I don't know about you, but this is where I'm at. Give me time, Lord. That almost seems like a foolish question, because they're dying so fast right now you can't reach them. With all these things that I've talked about, all these disasters that I've talked about. If it's not physical disaster, it's spiritual disaster. And it's just like, Lord, help! I preached this morning. Hear and help, Lord. Jehoshaphat. The army's coming. Hear and help us, Lord. And God says, I've heard you and I will help you. Man, that's what I need. You know, you sit down and you try to talk to a loved one and you say, look, you've been in church. I saw you got baptized. You got a Bible sits on your shelf. You never open it. You've got churches to go to, but you never go to them. I know you know. But I believe your heart is so far away from God. You don't live for God. You're not ready to die for God. But you are going to die. And when you get out, you're going to stand before God. And I've told you the truth. He's going to either say to you, well done, or he's going to say, depart from me. And your life has not been consistent with the scriptures. Man, I'm concerned about you. I'm worried to death about you. God's going to destroy you. Aren't you worried? Well, no, I believe in God. But the devils believe in God. You ain't no different than them. That's not how you influence and win people over, by saying you ain't no different than the devils, right? But that's the reality. That's what James chapter 2 says. The devils believe in God. The devils, they fell down and worship God. You can't even get them to come worship God. Church is the number one thing that has been departed from in this United States. Bible was departed from a long time ago. Prayer closets were left a long time ago. But the last thing that goes is the church. They won't even come and sit for an hour. An hour, 60 minutes. I know I sometimes get long-winded in 62 or 64. But hey, I got started late, right? Give me a couple minutes here or there. They won't even come for 1 hour. What is it to read one verse? How long does it take you to read one verse in the Bible? 2, 3 seconds? And they won't even do that. How long do they sit in front of a television set? How long do they sit in front of a ball game? How long does it take them to play their lottery, drink their beer, and shoot their drugs? How long does that take them? They indulge in that for hours, don't they? They won't give God seconds and minutes. Now, I know I'm mincing on time-wise. God requires all. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just asking you to understand they won't put one foot forward to come towards God. They are just like Korah. And I am dreading the day where God says, and He will, step aside. The only reason that He doesn't consume them right now is because I stand in front of Him saying, not today. And God in His grace and mercy to my soul, to my heart, says, I'll give you another day. But I don't know about tomorrow. And I don't know about next week. And I don't know about next month. But I got today. One more chance. One more pleading I'll do tonight at the midnight hour. God, I know they're just like Korah. They disobeyed you. They resent you. They're thwarting your authority. I know you're ready to consume them. But I beg of you, I plead with you, please don't do it. Have mercy. In wrath, remember mercy, Lord. Spare them. I had a pastor friend, and again, reminiscing, experiences that I draw from that shapes me, forms me. That's one of these. There was a pastor. I had him at first broken before the throne back in 2007. He was executive committee president in the Southern Baptist Convention. His daughter was 16 years old. Saved, baptized, member of the church, all the right things. Started drinking. You know, in a day and an age where Friday night it was okay to go out and socially drink, have a couple beers with friends and whatnot. But I never known anybody that ever socially drank that didn't eventually get drunk at some point. And most high school parties, Friday night, Saturday night, were indulgence to become intoxicated and drunk. And nothing good ever comes from that, ever. I see all the horror stories out at the university and the college campuses today, what happens when people get drunk. Passed out drunk, alcohol poisoning. Every semester, every month over at Potomac State College in Kaiser, West Virginia, there is a 911 call dispatch that goes out in those dorms. Small little campus like Potomac State. 1,800 kids, 1,500 kids, whatever's there. Most of them don't even on campus. Most of them drive. But somewhere during those semesters, once a month, there's alcohol poisoning, life and death because of the indulgence of alcohol. Now, this is just alcohol. And I know. Not drunk driving or alcohol poisoning or any of that other stuff that fits into this. It's the choices that they're making to do it. And they are hurtling themselves closer to death than they ever knew before. But it's so acceptable out there, isn't it? Everybody does it. Everybody's done it. Right? No. God has got people out there that have never tarnished themselves with such things. They were saved, they were bought, they were protected, they were delivered, they were shielded from it. They never participated in it. Small? Yeah. Remnant? Yeah. But they were found faithful. But this guy's daughter got into that. And then she got pregnant. And then started dealing with the depression. Then came the meds. It was a progression of evil, I call it, because it took one step. Hey, try this beer. One beer won't hurt. One drink won't hurt, right? Man, it opened up. Drinking a beer every weekend, intoxicated, drunk, grades fall, job loss, wrecked a vehicle, pregnated, single parent. Need I go on with this progression? But it's a story that we all know. She committed suicide. He wrote a book on it. His precious daughter. I prayed for him. I prayed for his daughters. And I'll never forget the day that I heard that. I met him up at Frostburg a couple years right after that. He was in there speaking. And I had dinner with him and we sat down. I said, I've got to ask you, how do you cope with that? And I'll never forget the look on his face when I asked him that. I went on mission trips with Dub Jackson. Dub Jackson had 5 or 6 kids. He was in his 80s, World War II pilot over Japan there right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he was still there and went back in as a missionary, evangelizing the Japanese for the gospel in the 1950s and 60s. And I was on these mission trips with him. He had 5 kids. And the one kid that he had an aquarium in his room, and he was growing marijuana. He kept telling his mom and dad it was a science experiment.
Yeah.
They didn't know any better. They had never been around drugs. They didn't know what it was. They 16, 17-year-old kid, high school, starts growing it. Occasionally. Just smoke it here and there, smoke it there, no biggie. Now he's in his 20s. Now he's a full-blown every day. Got to have it every day. It progresses from that because now there's other drugs that have been introduced. And so now in his 30s into his 40s, he's a full-out junkie. Raised in church. Christian parents. Prayed for. In his 50s, he dies. And I sat down with him. We was in Hong Kong. And we were sitting there in the lobby. This hotel was spacious, man. And I sat down with him and I said, I got to ask. I got to know. How do you deal with that? Don Miller, I was going through that stuff I said, and I found Don Miller, and I remember sitting with Don Miller down there in Dallas, Texas. He had an arbor in his backyard. Fence, it was a community, house to house, that kind of thing, rural or urban setting, and houses right on top of each other. He had this picket fence around, and he had this two-seat swing. And he said, this is where I meet God, 4 o'clock every morning. I come out here in this swing. And he had 4 nut trees that he had planted when he moved there 40 years ago, whatever it was. And these trees, spacious, big, and he says, I have 4 kids and every tree represents a child. And he went like this, and the tree that was behind us, he says, but this is my prodigal. This is my son that raised in church, baptized, but the world's got him. And I'm sitting there with this guy. Now, God has put these people in my life, one right after another, that I can ask them all the same question. I got to ask you. They're being consumed. Mind, heart, body, soul. How do you deal with that? Question over and over and over again that you and I are seeing and facing on every scale of every family that we know. How are you dealing with that? You and I know the answer. Paul said it over in the New Testament. But by the grace of God go I. God's grace. I get up in the morning because God says so. I go to bed because God says so. And nothing else. It has nothing to do with me. Only with God. Everything that I have or everything that I exist in and know is because of God. That's it. How do you deal with this? But by the grace of God. We watch society, families, situations, circumstance over and over and over, and the tragedy. And most people that you and I know have no grace of God within them, do they? They have rejected it. They won't embrace it. They try to hold themselves up. They try to encourage themselves. They try to better themselves. But they have no spirit of God within them. The role of the intercessor is to pray for such, just like Moses and Aaron did. We are seeing them consumed. And you and I are left to fall on our faces before God like Moses and Aaron and say, God, don't do this. But there does come a time, over in the book of Jeremiah, you read it, when God says, Jeremiah, and there you go again, 2 times. Jeremiah, Jeremiah. Yes, Lord. Don't pray for these people no more. Don't pray for them no more. It's over. Done. I'm done. Now again, you're left with a choice. Well, God said that, and what God says, God means, God can fulfill, but when he said it to Moses and to Aaron, they said no. No. You can't do this, God. These are your people. This is your covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Don't do this. And God says, okay, I'll spare them. If you knew this was their last day, what would you do different? How would you respond? If you knew. Better that we not know, but if you knew. I'm telling you, I would fly right. I'd get them up out of bed first thing in the morning and say, me and you're going to have a heart-to-heart out in the parking lot or at the kitchen table. One of the two. You pick. We're going to talk. You will be in church. You will hear the gospel. You will receive the invitation. You can't put a chicken wing on them and make them do it, can you? John 6. Unless the Spirit draws them, they will not come. You and I are left as intercessors to pray and to plead with God on behalf of men for their souls. You can reason and talk to them till you're blue in the face, as the old saying goes, and won't make one dent there. But you can talk to God and plead with him and make a difference in their lives. You be the intercessor that this society and our families need so much. 1, because they won't pray for themselves. But 2, because you know such accounts in the Scripture are happening again right in front of us. And God looks for a man, for a woman, to stand in the gap that says, Lord, don't consume them. Give us time. Give us time. And plead with God, because you know what's at stake. You know what's happening. And you know how urgent the time is. You and I don't think, from Sunday school lesson, you and I are no different than Jairus. Our sons and daughters lie at the brink of death. And the only one that can heal them and help them is who?
Jesus.
Jesus. Jesus, come quickly. Jesus, come. Touch them. Say the word. Just say the word. Do it, Lord. And the thing about it that you and I both understand, he is more willing to do it than what you and I are to ask him to do it. But you and I have to ask him. Ask, and it shall be given. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be open. Call, and I will answer. You do your part. Intercede. Just like Moses and Aaron. It is the reality of our day. This is where we're at. Let us be